Welcome. Uh, Welcome everybody to this fourth episode of uh, Bookmakers, the CCT conversation series around books and their makers. Uh, my name is Prasad Shetty, and I work here at the School of Environment and Architecture C. And uh, CCT is the public dissemination platform of the institution, and every fortnight we organize a, a talk uh, and in a series, and for these 6 months uh, the series is called Bookmakers. The Bookmakers series is about uh, people who work with text, but also are in the process of making books and see books as forms of their practice. We've invited translators and uh, book collectors and artists and book exhibitors, biographers, fiction writers, non-fiction writers, a whole series of them in this uh, series, which started in November 2024, and it will go on till April 2025. Uh, Today we have with us uh, Mustansir Dalvi, Professor Mustansir Dalvi, presenting his biography on Charles Correa. Uh, the book is called Charles Correa, Citizen Charles. Uh, Professor Dalvi is uh, is a dear friend first, but also a friend of C. Uh, in 2016, when we were in serious trouble, when we had to shift from the Open University to Mumbai University, it was Mustansir who helped us navigate that journey, actually. So he's very important, friend of ours. Uh, Professor Dalvi has been the chairperson of the Board of Studies for Architecture for Mumbai University for several years, and uh, his syllabus, the syllabus that we follow today from Mumbai University, was basically chaired by Mustansir. And the freedom that we enjoy at sea and the freedom that we enjoy within Mumbai University is primarily efforts of Mustansir, and thank you for that. Uh, Professor Dalvi used to teach at JJ School of Architecture, and I have learned today that he's involved with the setting up of the master's program to the autonomous university, to the autonomous JJ University, a master's of architectural education and masters of metropolitan practice, metropolitan architecture. Professor Dalvi is a senior scholar. He's written and has a PhD on the Art Deco buildings of Mumbai. He's an expert on Art Deco buildings of Mumbai. But beyond all of this, Mustansir is also a poet, and but my favorite book of and work of Mustansir is Muhammad Iqbal's translation of Shikwa. Welcome, Mustansir. Welcome to C. Uh, Today, he's launching his book, which came out late last year. This is the book. It is very competitively priced, so I encourage all of you all to buy this. It's outside. It's the first biography of an architect of Charles Correa, and I think as far as the biographies of architects are concerned, in this country we've had Hafiz's biography written by Harshad Bhatia. Yeah. Otherwise, we don't have biographies of architects. So this is the first of its kind. When I was reading the book, I was also looking at other biographies of architects across the world, and uh, Robert Moses has a biography. Gary has a biography. Uh, uh, and Wright, of course, has many biographies. Uh, Albert Speer has a biography. And there is something about the biographies of architects. You know, uh, there is there is immense ambition in these men to to change the world. Actually, Chance Korea is not different. There is an ambition to change the world, to reconfigure space, to kind of uh, uh, to think of a new world. And but Charles Korea uh, is a very important architect for this country. Uh, I mean, uh, his interventions and rearticulations of type, whether it is a house, whether it is a museum, whether it is a mall, even, and this idea of how do you kind of perforate the building and get the outside inside and inside outside is something which has been his quest for a long time, and we have always learned from him. Uh, Korea is important for the city, and the book uh, notes moments of where Korea has intervened to shape the form of the city as well as the expanse of the city of Bombay. Korea has been awarded the Padma Bhushan but also Padma Vibhushan, and he's also the Gomantak Vibhushan of Goa. So I mean, very tall personality we are discussing this evening as far as Indian architecture is concerned, and who better to discuss it other than Mustansir himself, Mustansir.
You want to turn it off? Uh, Thank you, Prasad and Rupali, Anuj. Thank you all for calling me here uh, and for introducing my book to the school. It's a very special moment for me. I've come here for the first time, which is entirely my fault. It's kind of inexcusable, but it is what it is. And I was very happy to be shown the school today. And since you mentioned the syllabus that we had at one time spent quite some effort to make, I think this school is probably the ideal school for a syllabus like that. And it is very, very special if you are here in this school either as a student or as a teacher, especially at this point in time, because it seems to me that you will be able to do what you like. I think that is that kind of freedom of imagination, okay, of being in an institution of this size and scale with this kind of location and freedom is something that is intensely special. And I do hope you all see it the way I see it as well. So thank you for calling me here. And in, allowing me to introduce this very small book about a very large person. What I can do is perhaps talk a little bit about the book, how it came to be, and so on, and then maybe read a few passages from it so that you can get some idea of the writing, as well as uh, bring out several thoughts and ideas of Charles Correa himself. Uh, it's kind of bit daunting because several of the people here have in fact worked with Charles Correa. They have interacted with him. They have seen him much more closely than I have. Uh, so in one sense, I'm sure when they read this book, there would be so many other memories that clash with whatever text there is over here. Uh, so to kind of summarize the story of this book, I was commissioned by the publishers, Neogi Books, to write a biography of Charles Correa. They wanted a biography of an architect, and this is the first biography of the architect that they published in a series called Pioneers of Modern India. So this is about the 8th or the 10th book in the series. They all have covers that look like this, and they're all about this thin. Pioneers of Modern India are a series of biographies of people more or less who shaped the country after it got independence. And they are not the usual names that you would imagine, you know, Nehru and Ambedkar and Patel and other such, but these are more the people who are shapers of imagination and influence. Names like R.K. Lakshman, the cartoonist, or R.K. Narayan, the author, M.S. Subbalakshmi, Homi Bhabha, or even the latest book, which actually came out after Charles Correa, a book on Sham Benegal. So in each of these cases, the brief that was given to the authors and was given to me is that it has to be a small book. Okay, I was told the number of words I could write. I exceeded them, and to the extent possible, it was all right. It was also, and this was the tough part for anybody who has been in architecture for such a long time, to write it for a general audience. So the potential readers of this book are not architects or people who already know these things, but for people, say, maybe like your parents who are not architects. Okay, would they find this book interesting? And that became the real challenge for me to write it. And obviously, as I wrote it and I submitted the first draft to the press, they appointed an editor, which is the normal practice when you write a book. And that editor went through the text, and after that, there was a whole series of exchanges back and forth where they kept on saying, but explain this thing. Okay, and I'm saying, what is there to explain? I said, no, you have to do it. So probably for the first time, I can't find it now immediately, somebody has written in 2 or 3 sentences what RCC is. Okay? Imagine explaining RCC to somebody, it's there in this book. I was asked to explain what brutalism is. Okay, so then that is there in this book. So some things, it was as much a learning experience for me as it was the joy of writing. Now, of course, when I was offered this proposition to write a book on Charles Correa, I said yes instantly. Who will refuse a chance to write a book on such a amazing personality in architecture? Okay, I didn't know Charles Correa personally very well. I had a lot of interaction with him in small doses. I was a person who who actually hosted and conducted the Charles Correa Gold Medal for 4 times in 2 different colleges. And whenever we met, he was extremely nice and extremely cordial, extremely deferential. It was a source of perpetual embarrassment for me because he always called me professor. Okay, and I am probably the age of his grandson. So, I mean, you can't tell him don't do it. But he was. It was wonderful to be in his presence and to listen to him, and to be able to see how sharp he was. You know, he could get to the root of something just with one glance, and that was something that was delightful to see. But what is also delightful is that Charles Correa was also an excellent writer. And this is something which I can encourage you all to do as well, to read his books, because they are very clear. They are not at all difficult. They don't use big words. Charles Correa writes with precision and with elegance at the same time, and is quite a delight to read. And there is so much to learn, because you're looking at these pictures over here. I think there is much more to Charles Correa beyond these images. Okay, and those are the deeper ideas that he set for himself as he set up his practice. Okay, and it's these deeper ideas that sometimes you can see in his work, but many times you can't. Many of his ideas also went unrealized, and I'd like to maybe share one or two of those, which are also very important. Fortunately, the Charles Correa Foundation had an exhibition some years ago and has got a book out on the unbuilt work of Charles Correa. Okay, and that is a book worth looking at as well, because that is just a book of ideas, you know. It's a book of concepts. It's a book of actually perpetual delight. So all these things kind of came together in the writing of this book. So here is a life of a person seen through a practice in architecture. I think this is the first time that a book has been written on Charles Correa since he passed away. So this book covers the entire life, you know, right from the time he was born to the time he passed away. So I don't think there has been another book written in this kind of juncture. But that is just a matter of coincidence. There's nothing particularly significant about it. But the fact is that if you have this book in your hand, you can go through the entire life of a person. A little bit about how this book is structured, and then maybe I can read some things from it. Of course, I talk about his early days, his early influences, the time that how he grew up in Bombay and how he went to study architecture, first at Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then at MIT. A very special event, I think quite a path-breaking event in his life, is his dissertation at MIT, his thesis, where, breaking all previous precedents, he is allowed to give a dissertation which is in the form of a film rather than a piece of writing. And not only is it in the form of a film, he chooses to make it into an animated film. And that is still acceptable. But it's not about the fact that he made a film. It's about the kind of learnings that he got in the process of making a film. Because in this film, he directly talks about the end users and their experiences in a city. Okay, an urban end user seeing the city change in front of his eyes and seeing things develop in a way that they don't like, and what can be done about it. Now, he was talking about downtown Boston in the making of this film, but when he got his degree and came back, you can see the same sensibility when he sets up his practice. I talk about in this book the context in which Charles Correa comes to India and sets up his practice in the early 1950s, because what is happening in the nation at that time is very, very interesting. India has just got independence, and you have a fairly dynamic Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, uh, in Delhi, who has a pretty much hands-on approach to what should be done to make the country uh, come into the forefront of the whole world of nations in a very short period of time. And in that process, what he does is he brings together the best of minds, and he encourages them to do the best of work. And that includes 3 or 4 very important architects whom I have described over here. And one of them is Charles Correa. Charles Correa's almost the first project that he does is the Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya, which I think all of you know about. And that, in one sense, sets the stage for what he will do throughout his practice. The other very important early building that he does is actually a very small prototype called the Tube House. And the Tube House is a small standalone kind of single family residence, which he does to win a competition, which is intended to be multiplied many times. Only one gets built. But the design of that, the section of that, and the conceptual articulation of that becomes the basis for a lot of his housing projects. And we can see them again and again, because very interestingly, the ideas which he uses for people at absolutely the bottom of the economic scale, as in the case of the Tube House, he uses the same section for one of the wealthiest industrialists in Ahmedabad when he designs the Ramakrishna House. He uses the same ideas when he designs mass housing in Peru. He uses the same ideas when he designs the cross-section of Kanchenjunga. So he shows how, with certain clear articulated concepts, you can create architecture at several scales. And his concepts essentially emerge from context, location, and climate. Charles Correa has said many things which have become famous over a period of time, and one of his most famous sentences is form follows climate. Okay, just remembering that, can change anybody's design. If you have a design project, no matter what it is, if you just begin that project by saying form follows climate, it will take you in a very interesting, a very specific, and perhaps a very relevant direction. Okay, so all these things happen. So I have a chapter on how his buildings are the articulation of climate. And then, of course, there is Charles Correa in his multiple roles as the shaper of the urban space, as well as an activist for citizens everywhere. This is what made me give the title to this book, Citizen Charles. And I have a chapter on that, in which we talk about both his successes at an urban level as well as his failures at an urban level, and they are more or less equal, or perhaps the failures are greater than the successes, not because the designs were bad, not because the ideas were not clear, or not because they were incomplete in any sense, but because perhaps the city was not ready to accept it for a variety of agendas. So some of his most important ideas, whether it was the reshaping of the waterfront in Bombay, or whether it was the entire idea of the mill lands as adaptive reuse and the creation of more open spaces, or even small projects like the landscaping outside the Gateway of India, all never took place. What did take place, and probably what can be seen, I think, as his greatest achievement, is New Bombay. Okay, New Bombay. Why did New Bombay start? New Bombay started because in 1964, the BMC put out the first development plan of what should happen to a city like Bombay. And that development plan, in the opinion of Charles Correa, was rather limited because the city was only growing in a north-south direction. And Korea had already understood that if the city has to really grow well, it should grow in the eastern side, across the harbor, on the mainland. And he thought that an entire settlement could be articulated over there, which he does propose along with two colleagues of his, one a planner, Praveena Mehta, the other a structural engineer, Shirish Patel, and the three of them very smartly, very strategically use the press, they use their friends in journalism and in the art world to articulate their ideas and bring it into the public, to public notice. And then in a very slow and painful process, as is always the case, had to convince the government to agree to them, which finally they did. And the whole idea of the New Bombay project was formed. Of course, to form that, they had to form a company, which is called SIDCO, which I don't know how many of you live in New Bombay, but you would know what SIDCO is. Okay, SIDCO is the product of, or the byproduct, shall we say, of Charles Correa's imagination of New Bombay. Now, New Bombay has been there for almost, 40, 50 years, and has developed into something that is probably different from what Charles Correa imagined, but has developed nevertheless. I live there, I know how it is. New Bombay has consistently been amongst the top 2 or 3 cleanest cities in the country. Okay, and I think that also, to a certain extent, is the result of the way the city is articulated and the way it is planned. There are downsides to New Bombay as well. For example, there was this wonderful idea in the original plan of creating a lot of water transport across the harbor from Sivri to places like Uran, Mora Bandar, Belapur, Navasheva, and so on, which really haven't happened. I wish they had. It would have brought the city together in a very interesting way. I think there is still the chance of that. In his later projects, Charles Correa develops other ideas. He starts looking at the country, its background, its history, and starts to see certain very universal forms that come out of our own cultural past. And he then tries to convert them into just the concepts for contemporary buildings. And that includes a lot of ideas right from either the Vedic times or the Indo-Islamic times, the colonial times, and so on, and puts them through a series of exercises in his buildings. He also, and some of us who are as old as me will remember this, holds or organizes one of the first comprehensive exhibitions of Indian architecture in Bombay in 1986, an exhibition called Vistara. And that exhibition has a lot of impact on people who come and see it, on students, on architects. And what it does is it shows on an equal footing the very monumental buildings and the very ephemeral buildings. And this is probably done for the first time. Okay, so you have, say, a large palace, say the Lakshmi Vilas Palace in Baroda, side by side with a slum. Okay, or not even a slum, people living in a pipe. Now, when you do these things and you put them side by side, you create some very interesting dynamics. You make people realize that everyone is equal and that architecture should, in fact, be inclusive. You can celebrate the big buildings, but you also have to talk about the buildings that are not big, or the buildings that are made by people who are not architects. Okay, so this Vistara did that in a very beautiful way. And then towards the end of his life, what happens is, at least in my opinion, he designs some of his finest buildings. But these are not buildings in India. Very interestingly, he designs a beautiful building in Toronto. He designs a beautiful building in MIT, the MIT campus, and probably one of his absolutely high achievements of his career, the building in Lisbon called the Champalimod Center for the Unknown. This one, which is in fact much more than just a center. It is a place to do research on cancer, but he at the same time gives it a public aspect so the people from Lisbon can come and visit it as an open space that is just touching the sea. Now, this space or this point of sea is equally important because historically it is from this place that people like Columbus and others set off to do the great explorations that would ultimately uh, end up in the United States of America and so on. So these projects, his last projects, are very significant and important projects, which I think have not been described uh, enough, and they still need a lot of people to look back uh, at them, and we can learn so much from them as well. In one sense, at a very uh, unmanifest level or an intangible level, the Champalimod Center contains all of his ideas, all in one, kind of embedded, almost unself-consciously, in a building that doesn't look automatically like a Charles Correa building, but is still a Charles Correa building. So the book then, of course, concludes with his passing. This is more or less the broad structure of the book. I had some limitations in doing this book. I'd like to talk about those. One is that while there is no shortage of material on Charles Correa's architecture, there isn't much on Charles Correa's life as a person. Okay, I mean, and I don't think there is any particular reason for that. It's simply that when he was in practice, that seemed to be the thing that was always projected. So to write about Charles Correa, who he was, where he was born, what about his childhood, and so on, I was very lucky that I could have fairly long interviews with Correa's daughter, Nandita, and his wife, Monica, who were very kind and very open to talk about so many things that as stories are there in this book. I was also given a lot of access to the archives of Charles Correa in the Charles Correa Foundation in Goa. So that became an important resource for me to write this book. So this book is in a sense a mix of things. It is partly a biography and it is partly a discussion of ideas. And these are ideas, of course, articulated by Correa on his designs, architecture, and life, I would say. Yeah, so how would you like to go about it, Would you want me to read some things, or would you just want to open out into a discussion? Whatever you say. All right. Okay, let me just read two short bits. One is the first. I'll just read the way the book opens, which is very, very interesting because it talks about a childhood obsession that he has. Limited elements, endless possibilities. Pieces of tin plate track from a Hornby train set in multiple variations would carry young Charles Correa away into a wonderland of kaleidoscopic imaginings. The Hornby set was presented to him by his uncle Freddie when he was a child growing up in Bombay. A sparse gift, given that these were the war years, full of shortages and restrictions. The hand-me-down box contained a couple of locomotive engines, wagons and boxcars, and tracks for them to run on. The rail ends or the tracks could be joined to other rails of various shapes, straight length, semicircular ones, chords, and figure of 8 crossovers. Punctuated by miniature stations, signals, tunnels, crossings, and sidings, these would all come together in formations that could be worked anew day after day. Organized lines became functioning universes on his bedroom floor. His passion for this model train set would have him procure catalogues like the legendary Hornby Book of Trains or Bassett Locke's Model Railways, which he would then pore over and over. More than role-playing as a train driver, a conductor, or a commuter, Charles would find delight in the track variations that for him became a train system, much more than the sum of its elements. Charles would draw options of track layouts endlessly on sheets of graph paper. He would, in essence, start to think in terms of plans and sites. These early drawings would spark an obsession with design, his design, on which his trains would run. The ability to play both God and end user simultaneously defines an architect. The Hornby tracks unself-consciously led Charles to develop design skills as an iterative process where you work on a project, you stop and review it, go back and make changes, stop and review, change, and so on, until you are satisfied that the design is ready. The parallel lengths of tin would make Charles familiar with the value of modular design, made with a few elements repeated again and again in endless formations. Later in his career, this approach would pervade his housing design, from the Privy scheme in Lima to the artist village at Belapur in New Bombay. Later, as a teenager, he would encounter architectural journals for the first time. Looking at the drawings of buildings printed in them, he found that he could easily understand their plans, the spatial arrangements, and the volumetric understanding provided by sections. He could appreciate the strong architectural concepts that led to good design. He could visualize spatial sequences and the interrelationship between building blocks, which made good architecture. Charles Correa famously acknowledged, "I think I became an architect because of toy trains." And perhaps I can read a bit from the very last chapter, which is a sort of summary that may be a way to maybe start a dialogue. Throughout his career, Correa imagined inclusive spaces. Where not obvious, he created them. When not provided, he objected. Through his voice, his writings, his advocacy, and his speculative designs. The public realm was central to his architecture. Even private homes were oriented around spaces for togetherness. His kit of parts included his faith in themes that he believed were deep structures to Indian life and to humanity as a whole, along with his innate ability to evoke a sense of space, a sense of place. These found architectural shape through his work, resulting in some of the most iconic buildings of the 20th and early 21st century. His quest for non-building resulted in some of the richest architectural landscapes ever created. Even his unbuilt work is an archive of ideas ready for the picking by future generations. Bombay was his city, his backyard, the memory bank of his childhood and growing up years, the serene Bombay, the Bombay without barriers, where rich and poor lived cheek by jowl, where many cultures and timelines met and intersected, as is the wont of a great port city. This was the city he loved and practiced in, and as a true blue Bombaywala, a lot of Korea's attention was focused on his hometown. It is a loss to the city as well as to the architect that so little of his vision was realized here. Every architecture student knows Kanchenjunga, but few were ever given the chance to appreciate the progressiveness of his proposals, the reshaping of Back Bay, the consolidation of the mill lands, the waterfront that would have made New Bombay a special place, even in the simple civic gesture for the hawkers of Bombay. I don't expect anyone to follow me, he once said in an interview to The Guardian. But am I frustrated? Yes, reasonably so. Above all, he was Citizen Charles. His vision of the city was both broad and specific. He saw patterns and possibilities before others, especially the government, did. Moreover, he offered solutions freely. That few of these were actually implemented by civic authorities is something that all its citizens must be held to account for. And this is something he wrote about a snail and the trail that a snail leaves as it moves. Like the trail that a snail leaves in his wake, so an architect leaves behind his body of work, gradually accumulated over the years from the concerns he addresses. There are other concerns that start to accumulate in your mind and in your drawing hand as you go through life, and they also contribute to the trail you leave behind. So yes, like I said, he was also a wonderful writer. There is a very poetic lilt in some of the things that he writes, and is something that we should all should read, and maybe, I suppose, unconsciously imbibe, so that as practicing architects, these things emerge in new and novel ways in one's own designs. So, well, thank you very much for calling me here once again and listening to me.
So thanks, Mustansir, for this very beautiful launch. Uh, and one thing I should say about the book is that every chapter is kind of ended with a barcode, which opens a movie, a film, a short clip, including the thesis that Mustansir spoke about, and a variety of other films on Korea and by Korea. Uh, thanks for the book and thanks for the talk. Uh, I don't have. I mean, we'll kind of you know do this as a conversation, and I'll invite others also who had some close associations with Korea. Neera is also here. He's forwarded one of your books. So Korea believed in design, it kind of, and and the book is very clear about this magic pill of design, which will solve problems of the world, uh, and in one of the slides you see the table. Anuj pulled it out this morning. The table has the train, the toy train. That's Korea's table. Uh, I want to kind of work this thing about believing in design, and because you've been teaching design for so many years as a professor of architecture, how do you kind of look at that belief? How do you kind of, uh, I mean, people are suspicious of this belief. I mean, it sometimes works. Sometimes it's just euphoria. Sometimes it just gives you a mission. For Korea, it gave him a mission. This belief that he can change the world with design. So I want you to kind of reflect a little bit as a teacher of architecture on this whole belief on design.
I think more than reflecting as a teacher, I should begin to answer you by reflecting as a student. Because around the time when we started to study, this is in the early 1980s, it was very significantly a different world. And it was probably a world which has more in affinity with Korea than with, say, you guys over here. All right. And that was that we were deeply rooted in the modernist paradigm. And that modernist paradigm was conveyed to us as if that is the only thing there is, as if this is what architecture is. And we believed it. Okay, we believed it totally. And what is that modernist paradigm? It's the thing which I now teach as history. Okay, what did we believe? We believe that you should not look back at the past. We believe that there is no such thing as historical precedent. Okay, we believe that technology and science are the supreme things, and we have to put our entire faith and trust in that. And most importantly, we also believed that architecture was to be done as a social cause. All these are modernist paradigms that we were taught in school, okay, not as options, but as articles of faith. Architecture ऐसे ही होता है. Okay, and we didn't know better than that, so that is what we practiced in. I think it required me probably decades of being a teacher to change. Okay, to say that, okay, what we did at that time has its value, but is not the only thing there is. Now, perhaps when we are looking at the way Korea treats his projects, there is a little bit of that. Because remember, he also grows up in an entirely modernist background when it comes to his teachers in Michigan and in MIT. Who are his teachers? His teachers are Buckminster Fuller, okay, Kevin Lynch, other people who were probably from the Bauhaus, who had moved to America after the Second World War, and so on. The hardcore modernists. He is studying in MIT, which is itself a place that valorizes science and technology. Okay, so what do you expect actually? The interesting thing about Korea, at least, is that when he comes back and he starts working with GM Bhuta and Associates, a big office in Bombay, one of the first things he gets to work on in the office is a proposal for Rajghat. Okay, and the Rajghat proposal is, there's a competition, and GM Bhuta's office sends two entries. One is an entry by Charles Correa, the other is an entry by Vanu Bhuta on the Rajghat proposal. Vanu Bhuta's entry gets selected, Charles Correa's does not. But it sets the stage for Charles Correa then to look at architecture as as a set of possibilities with what there actually is. Not in an ideal state, but that you build out of what you can get. And that is something we see over and over again. So it is a kind of not the right answer to your question, but a sort of response to what you said.
The book speaks about, I mean, in the chapter on citizen Korea, citizen Charles, it is there's a discussion on his the National Urbanization Commission, and it's interesting because Charles kind of Charles Korea kind of shifts, but before that, this is 1989, 1990, huh? So it is before that, the predominant narrative is that India lives in the cities. So this commission, which is set up by the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, forcefully argues how cities are the engines of growth, and you need to look at cities, and then the host of investments start on cities, and India takes its cities very seriously. So Charles Perry is instrumental in that, and a little later he starts the UDRI, actually the Urban Design Research Institute, as a postgraduate program earlier, but then as a research institute. And then there is already New Bombay, which is there behind, and then there is a whole series of housing proposals for Mahada, which for the poor. There is and finally the millets, which basically is uh, uh, looking at what do you do with the lands which the mills occupy in the city of Bombay after they are shut. And in each of these things, there is a tremendous belief in design, and it's always the design which kind of which is put in, which is proposed, and most of them most of them took their own time, like 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 Navi Mumbai took 50 years to become a city, really, right? Kind of it takes it, and today it's a dynamic city, but it took its time. Mill ends never took off. The Mahada buildings never were built. They're the unbuilt projects. I mean, there is a city which is kind of which has its space, its logic, and its whole thing. And then you have Korea with his modernist agenda wanting to change that and intervene there. And till the age of 80, when you work with him, it's kind of like it's going on with this failure after failure after failure, and then still goes on with this projects. Uh, we have a very nice housing project of Korea in our neighborhood over here. The LIC buildings, yeah, the LIC housing project. So I was coming from there as to what kind of drives that belief. It's you understand that you're not aligning with the politics of the city, you're not aligning with the economy of the city, you are culturally at a shift. You know, you fail. Despite being very close to the political class, he kind of fails again and again and again, still continues this pursuit to kind of shift and change the city. And then that's something which is very, very unique. We don't see that with other architects as such in India who continue to do that, remaining within the city. So that's what I was kind of opening up. I mean, there are three people here who I want to kind of invite. Nira had uh, a close relation with Charles many occasions. Millands was one. Rupali also worked with Charles Korea on the Millands project twice, in 96 to 99 first, and then later on in 2005 to 2007. And then we have the Charles Korea gold medalist, Anuj, who also worked with him in his archiving of his projects and stuff like that. I want to invite each one of you to kind of, talk a little bit because about your own experiences with Korea. I mean,
Uh, since you mentioned Milan, first I met him when, no, I won't go into that history because that's not his history as an architect. He wanted to learn Marathi and so on. And, um, and because of Shirish Patel, there was a good relationship with him. But when I was, after my graduation, I started working just for a couple of months in LIC. That's the time he was working for LIC, I think Bangalore Housing. And then some LIC architects said, we were just 4, 5 of us taken only for that project. But some LIC architects had done something, and he was known to be very abrupt and very harsh also. And so his first response when he saw that design, he said, "Oh, this is all ice cream like." Nobody understood all that. I realized what he meant. And so another thing is he was very, uh, but he had the humility to, accept that the first plan he made for the mill lands, which was one third, one third, one third, and we talked about, again, design oriented, but still he definitely had Mhada housing in mind, which is public housing and public open spaces, although he went all the way to design. I think Kamla Raja college had helped him. No? So, designing mud houses, designing the vista, and all that. But uh, but but later when he came to know about this workers agitation and all, he was giving a talk on mill lands. I think it was in um, uh, ncp or something. It was a big auditorium, huge crowd, and somebody asked him why he did not think of the mills and the workers and the future of the mills or future of the workers. And he immediately said, but that was not my brief. But he changed a lot. And later he had, I mean, we would interact with Shirish Patel and him often. And that is the time he actually accepted. He had the humility. He says, I did not think about it. And our book had also come out. He had read the full book, 100 Years, 100 Voices. And then he formed a small group and invited me to be part of that group. He had lots of hopes, really had hope that his suggestions were going to be implemented. But two people failed him. I won't mention one name, but other is Milind Devra. Milind is the son, no? Yeah, Milind Devra. So we used to meet Patak, and he kept on giving him the hope that yes, we are going to go ahead and it will change, and that one third which was reduced to 1/6 and 1/8, that is going to change, and we are going to approach the government, and I am there, and I am there. And ultimately that did not come up. And that's the time he was very, very dejected, and he said, now I don't want to stay in Mumbai. And that's how I think he left to do something else. But that was a really a very, very big disappointment for him.
footnote to that. Let me just add a footnote to that, the Milllands project, because I think all of us were connected to it somehow or the other. Uh, Basically, the mills, there were more than 100 mills in the city. By the 80s, there were more than 50 mills, and they were shutting down. In the 80s, they were shutting down for a variety of reasons. They had kind of, and there were workers who had striked, and there were demands by the workers, and they had lost their jobs and stuff like that. And they were declared as sick mills by the government. And that time's government, Manoj Doshi's government, I think, it appointed uh, Charles Correa to plan for the lands what do you do with the lands which will be opened up after the mills are completely shut off? So he came up with this idea. Actually, that one third idea, I mean, it's under discussion as to who actually formulated it, because there are a lot of bureaucrats who were involved. Basically, they said the land below the mills could be divided into three parts: one third for housing of the workers and others, for through Mahada, one third for the city for its infrastructure, for its social infrastructure, and one third for the for the owners of the mill to kind of exploit it commercially. That was a formula that was set up, and Korea's biggest intervention was to kind of not divide each mill into one third, one third, one third, but to look at a chunk of mills, to put all of those areas together, think of it as large one third, and then divide that and take maybe one mill completely developed as a museum for the city, one mill completely developed for housing and stuff like that. So that was Korea's real, that Korea plan's intervention. And that happened. And then this happened in 96, 97, by the time the government has changed. And in 2004, the whole owners of the mills, they kind of, worked out with the bureaucrats and the politicians and the judiciary and everybody involved. And that one third that the developers were supposed to get, uh, that was expanded substantially. Finally, the developers were entitled to get almost 90% of the lands, and for the city there was only remaining 10% used for housing, and even that they wouldn't give over time. So that was what happened, and that dejected. And then there was a subsequent project that he, Korea kind of proposed, and he kind of and championed and argued with everybody. And I think that is when you got involved. You want to talk about it? Sorry.
That there was a court, since anyway mentioned the history, there was a court case, and to challenge, the reduction of spaces, reduction of spaces in public housing and public gardens. So there was a court case. It was won in the High Court, but in the Supreme Court, all the first time in the history, I think all the civil society groups came together, and there were mill workers on the other hand, and fighting against the government. And that was when the city lost the case, because Supreme Court said, no, we can't intervene. Whatever the government has done, you fight with the government. We are not going to interfere. That is the time there was an uproar in Mumbai. All the journalists, they really wrote a lot. And then we thought of having a large demonstration in Azad Maidan. And this was, of course, Union leader Datta Iswalkar's idea. And he said, look, all these people have been with us. Gerson Dikuna, then Sham Benegal, Charles Correa, and all that. So why don't we invite them for this demonstration? And they actually came. Charles Correa came to Azad Maidan to protest with the workers, but that was one of the last. That nothing was going to change. But still, otherwise Charles could have just said that Abhi is gone. Now I don't want to. You do whatever. But it didn't happen. He was there with us.
Sorry. I think the first time we worked actually with Charles Correa was 1996 when we were students still. And I think that was really the first time you really realized that you're part of an academic course, but you're not just students, but you're also part of something larger. You're part of thinking of the city. And I think that's something that made us grow up very soon. We were in the third year, but we never felt like we were young students. We felt like there was something bigger that we were part of. And it didn't matter because we were like doing our submissions, but at the same time we were working for the city. And I think that was one of the most, I think, like experiences of growing up. And then in 2005, I just finished my master's and come back. For a short time, I was going to go back. I had a H1 visa that was being sponsored by my office in the US. And then I get this call from Charles Korea saying, I need somebody to coordinate a team to work on the Midlands in my office. Can you come and meet me? So I was like, okay, let me just go and see. But I was going to go away in 2 weeks. I come there. There's a conversation. We're chatting for 30 minutes. There's nothing like an interview. There's a chat, about like the city and the world and all of that. And in 30 minutes, like, okay, let's start from tomorrow. And that's it. There was no conversation. There was nothing. And it was like, and it was like a personality who you felt like, okay, yeah, I have to do this. So and then we started working on this. We put together a whole exhibition. In fact, some of the court cases, the data for the court cases, the graphics that really showed how the 30 one third, one third, one third was actually surreptitiously changed to 1% for housing and 0.8% for public spaces. Yeah, and so it was like you really saw like this big orange pie that was reduced to this much, no? And so that was really an eye opener. In fact, when we made the diagrams, Korea saw it and he was like, "Oh my God, I thought it was bad, but this is worse." And then it was also about like it was about housing for the city, that there is so much space, and what do you do, because this land is not owned by the mill owners, it is actually the land of the city. So it should go for housing, it should go for city spaces, and then that one third can be sold. The mill owners can actually use that to pay off their loans and other things. There was a belief in that, but there was also a belief that design could do something. So that housing, because we also worked out the numbers, and that housing was going up to 10 stories because of the numbers. But then it was really about, the 10 stories not really just be sitting in the space. It is about the kind of open space that it constructed for the city, how it sat in the city, how that would be experienced by people from, who are living within it, but also from the city. So I think there was a like that design can do more than just the numbers. Was a belief that he had, and that actually extended, and it goes into all of these projects. And I think that takes me to, I'll just come to another conversation, because I think that sometimes his ideas exceeded even his design, because like we talked about, sometimes the complexity of the city is much more than what he was able to achieve, and he realized it. So he told you at one point we were sitting on a table, and he was talking about this R.K. Lakshman cartoon, and he said, there is this R.K. Lakshman cartoon where there is a pencil, where a planner is drawing on a city map, and there are people who are running away from the pencil. And it was him actually who was also making those drawings of the city, sitting with a big DP and saying, okay, this can happen with it. So he in some ways also realized the limitations, like you said, there was a kind of modernist baggage to the way he thought, and that he thought that he could design the city away. But I think what was really, really powerful, and something that I think can really teach the city how to do things, was some of his design principles that were actually really small, but they were large. So one of the things that he said was that as much open space you need inside the house, you need that much open space outside. And that is such an important thing, because today we have, you go to a housing society and you have uncles sitting on the across the table and fighting for that every square inch of space. Those square feet come aa raha hai, 3 square foot come aa raha hai. But what does it even mean to have that extra tile in your house, right? And I think Charles Correa really sort of opened up that imagination, that you do not have to only have a propertied space, but you need that open space outside, because that's how you build culture, you know. And I think the second thing that I'll probably end with this, but I think second really, really important thing, and this came out in when we were doing the exhibition Venice Space, when we curated that the exhibition in Jaipur. It was on Charles Correa's ideas, Savai Jai Singh's ideas of the city. but also how they anachronistically interacted with contemporary architects and artists thinking about spatial ideas. And I think one of the things that we read in one of the texts, which really kind of stood out, is that he spoke about, when he spoke about housing, he said, if there is ever a charter on housing to be written, the word incremental is something that needs to be included. And I think he was a pioneer in thinking of that. He, of course, did the artist village. It's some jinx, huh? Every time you say something, the project comes up. He did the artist village, but I think this idea of incrementality far exceeds even what he's done today. If we see, and this is a lot of students will say, we're doing a couple of housing projects in the housing studios, and students have worked with this, that this is the only way. People do not have the resources to build at one go. So the only way one can actually think is through incrementality, and that far exceeds modernist logics of thinking of space. So I think he was a pioneer in really kind of thinking. And I mean, this is again just ending with the, every time we worked in the studio, there was intensity. Okay, there was like really kind of intense working and all kinds of things being said. But at the end of the studio, at 6 o'clock in the evening, he would gather people around, and there was a conversation about big ideas. So I think it was, yeah, I mean, really, really amazing person to work with, and somebody whose ideas I think far exceed his own personality. So I'm going to move it to.
There is a bit on incrementality in the book as well, and it kind of opens up this open to sky, inside outside incrementality. The book does that. Um, yeah, great city, terrible place, great personality, terrible whatever. So I mean, uh, he's also like, there is an institutional dimension to him. There's an institutional dimension to him in the sense that you spoke about the foundation also, and the gold medal, the Korea gold medal, the UDRI, the Urbanization Commission earlier. So there is an institutional thing, that there is a software that he wants to put in place, which will guide. And today there are so many awards, and I think Charles Korea Award was one of the first awards for students, for thesis students. And this is something which he instituted, and you've been closely associated with it since its inception, and subsequently in the running of it. You want to open it up a little bit?
I think you're right in saying that it was probably the first award for thesis students. Uh, I don't remember anything else quite like it. After that, there are many, there's this council thing and so on. I think when Korea must have instituted that award, uh, there was this general rumor, which is not true, that he got such a lot of money out of that premium imperial that he put it into the making of this award. So I directly asked Nandita, is this right? And she said this all nonsense. So I mean, this obviously came out of his own resources and so on. But I think, remember that the first year that it was instituted, I forget which year, is it 2000? 2000, all right. Yeah, 2000, like 25 years, yeah. It was basically instituted as a Bombay Award, because the people who were, or the colleges who were allowed to participate were all the Bombay colleges, and only one from outside, that was the college in Goa. And that went on for several years, actually. So, I mean, since you ask, I suppose in one sense, uh, Korea is maybe, vicariously living the idea of urban development through the students especially ideas that he could not succeed in implementing, but would at least have thought that can be forwarded, that the next generation can take them forward. And if so, wonderful. I mean, that is exactly what should happen. So the award always was, despite the fact that your dissertation is on architecture, you are in a college of architecture, the award was for architecture that was deeply rooted in urbanism, uh, right from the beginning. And I think even today that is the case by and large. So that is, I think, the way he constituted it and the way it kind of developed over a long period of time. There's just one thought to continue with what you were talking about, mill lands earlier. I mean, I haven't exactly articulated it in the book, but it is there in my mind that his ideas didn't reconcile very well after liberalization. And perhaps the reason is this, that before liberalization, there was a sense of citizenship and there was a sense of citizens having some sort of responsibility, whether individually or collectively. After liberalization, that entire mindset is aspirational. Okay, and because of that, then the notion that you as a citizen also contribute to the larger city, I think, has somehow got subsumed in the notion of what am I getting out of it. Am I talking in a very simplistic way? I don't know, you tell me. But I think that these two are not compatible things for a mind like Charles Correa. Okay, he comes with earlier notions that, okay, now India is a free country, this is our country, we can all act together to take it forward, everyone is one. And the early years, the early decades, the 50s, the 60s, at least that mindset is still there, that everyone is talking about something very much in common. But after the 90s, it may not be that way.
It's interesting you brought in the idea of liberalization. This is, I mean, time-wise, many historians kind of mark 1991 as a as a year when India's economy was liberalized, which meant basically allowing private investments, opening up labor laws, relaxing tax regimes, relaxing licensing regimes, so on and so forth. And uh, and and of course the ways of doing things in Bombay changed, and the doing things in the city changed, and in the country changed. And one has to kind of, and I don't think there is anywhere I've seen an articulation of Korea's work with liberalization, as you are putting it. Uh, yeah, but I want to go back to because Anuj is here, so I want to go back to the award again a little bit, because he's one of the recipients of the award, and subsequently worked with Korea also. So you want to open that part of yourself and Korea?
It is ironic to talk about the gold medal because I was taking guidance from Prasad and he kept on saying that you cannot design your project like Korea. I was, for those who don't know, I was designing a cinema for the blind, and he said, because, and I did not know any other language other than Korea's, because we had consumed him so much and so intimately that our hands would only go in his, like, in the manner of as they taught us. No, but coming back to the gold medal, and in one of these back journeys in Jaipur with Monica Korea, and this, I don't know how true this is, the version so I happened to ask her that, how was this award instituted? And she said that, in fact, in his 60th year, they were planning to gift him something. And Korea felt that, you know, what do you gift like at this age? And in fact, it should be gift the other way. And that's and the gift and that the gift should have a longer life. And that's when he thought that let's institute an award. And it in fact the gold medal was a gift back to, let's say, the city, in that sense. And this is the version that Monica kind of recalled for me in that ride. And so coming back to the point about the institutional thinking that Korea had, not just this, but also we used to have this subject called basic design. And when I started teaching, I would talk to Arvind about, when did this basic design come, because it was not there always. And he said that, actually we had invited Korea to teach at academy, and he felt very frustrated with the students that these people don't know basic sense of, they don't have basic sense of composition, they don't have basic ways in which to put together things. So we should institute something which will teach them some basic idea about putting things together. And that's where I think the course of basic design itself was born and formalized and absorbed into the syllabus eventually, is what my interaction with Arvind. Yeah, yeah. And the and later I got a chance to work with Charles Correa when he was just closing his practice. And that mind which had completely consumed Korea was looking for those drawings which one saw in the book, that we see these ones, that these wavy kind of slowly drawn lines. And as an archivist, I just could not find those drawings, you know like, for me that was Korea. This is Charles Korea. It is synonymous to, like, he draws like this, so he thinks like this. But there was not even a single such drawing in his archive. And that's when I realized, and that's what got my scholarly interest in his work and his practice. That he would, although he had very sweeping strokes and lines through which he would express his ideas, but he knew that that's not what needs to be communicated to the world. So he would get these drawings printed, digitally made, and then ask a specific person to go over them on a tracing very slowly, so that they had the character of the ethos of the space that he was living in. So to the I mean, this was something so powerful that it made me go back to his monograph again and look at what else is hidden in this monograph. And then you see that there is only a list of, say, 20 to 25 projects, and you wonder that this man of course built 150. Where are the remaining, and what are the remaining? And you realize a specific strategic intervention of developing a nationalistic narrative in a monograph which comes out post liberalization, which is one of the first kind of monographs, important monographs to come out in India, for of an Indian architect, designed by himself. And in that there are so many kind of stories that one comes out. But anyway, that's a different thing, and I've written a long paper about it. But the other thing I want to also recount is that he also gave us the first and the most powerful architecture exhibitions, which was a comprehensive look at the entire kind of volume of work that was done in the subcontinent. So I think his personality was multifarious. He was not bounded just by architecture, but I think architecture for him was everything. It was his role as a educator, as an institutional person, institutional builder, a teacher, curator, writer. One more thing that I came to understand is he was the correspondent for Architectural Review during the 60s. The India correspondent, because at that time the London office couldn't afford to send people to look at what was being done, in this part. So he was the correspondent. So he had no kind of, barriers in doing anything it took to actually speak about what he thought about architecture and placing it in the global map. So yeah, I think his sheer energy to keep on driving with his ideas until the end is something that is contagious for me, and it kind of goes a long way. So thank you.
I think just one point to add to yours is that more or less the same time that he was a correspondent for the review, or a little after that, he was also the editor of the JIIA, the Journal of the Indian Institute of Architects, for about at least 2 years, I think. And then obviously he controls the narrative there as well. So,
Vistara that and I think it's seminal. That exhibition is very important for India, and to have an articulation on space, because it's not about built form. There are a lot of histories on built form, Indian built form. Before that, Percy Brown and Ferguson and even Bannister Fletcher, we know, but there are other people writing on various styles. A whole lot of people, because that was a stylistic history was something which was prevalent. But in 85, 84, 85, when Vistara comes in, it's a very different narrative of space, really, that is put forth. And I mean it's limiting to call it Indian space, but it is a very it's a very different spatial configuration that is seen in the subcontinent, distinct from European ideas of space. And I think that's something which is articulating it really, really well. And and that's where my question to you as a teacher scholar of architecture is also, this whole idea of mandala that comes in his work, the shunya, the mandala, the whole narrative of various kinds of symbolism that he gets. How does this modernist, on one hand, this activist, this socialist in many ways, in even, I mean, at least in his thinking, how does he kind of talk through the mandalas and the shunyas and the variety of things?
so I remember that we knew Korea before he went into all this, right? So once we started seeing this, even we thought the same thing. What the hell is he up to? You know? And I think I got the answer when actually writing this book, because at one level, all that looks very superficial. It's all about image making. It's all about appropriating things and kind of sticking them there and so on. But I think we have to recognize the fact that he was a very well-read person. And once you do that, then your larger worldview, I suppose, is constantly changing. And he is looking for certain uh, points of stability in a larger philosophy, a larger worldview. He's also looking at India as, I suppose, almost objectively, not so much deeply embedded, that, what makes India? And are there certain intangibles that we can all agree upon in terms of what makes India, especially from an architect's point of view, from a spatial design point of view, and so on. And he comes to the conclusion, I assume, that there are these universals when it comes to articulating and understanding the world we live in. And that's where probably before all this, he comes with the idea of the non-space, which is always a central open space that is not built upon. And because that non-space, that non-architectural space is not built upon, suddenly it acquires a tremendous potential of its own. Uh, let's not use words like energy and spiritual and mystical words, but simply the fact that even as form, if you have an opening right in the middle, it has a different connotation than simply the space. And he very famously puts it in his comparison between the schoolhouse of the West and the guru teaching under a tree. Okay. Now, the guru teaching under a tree has got nothing to do with Indian sentimentality or something like that. But the fact that if you teach under a tree, you make the relationship between enclosure and outside fuzzy. Okay. And in this fuzziness, many things can happen. There is a potential in this fuzziness. And to a large extent, even in his architecture, you can spot these spaces of fuzziness in almost every project, which actually make the project. Okay. And to try and understand this even further, I don't know if you give me a chance, I can just read one small passage, which sort of answers this question. And that is in his design, again, an unbuilt design, which emerges after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. In 92, the Babri Masjid is demolished. In 92 and in 93, you have some of the worst riots that Bombay has ever known. Lots and lots of people are killed in that. And there is a lot of urban displacement. Okay, people have shifted all over the place. And one would say that as much as liberalization, the events of 93 also have changed the country. Okay, perhaps the way we see the country today may have its roots in that event. But this is just a short paragraph, but this may also answer you to a certain extent. And Korea was very disturbed by the events of 92 and 93, and he wrote several letters to newspapers, which I was able to find in the archives, sort of expressing his outrage. But then what he also did was that now that that masjid was demolished, what should come there? He made a proposal by himself. Okay, and this is about that proposal. Deeply secular, Korea was disturbed enough by the events in 92 and 93, particularly the communal bloodletting in Bombay, to offer a proposal for peace through architecture, an alternative for the disputed site at Ayodhya, where once the Babri Masjid had stood. He sought to unite fractured minds through an unbuilding, and he chose a primordial form that sank a few levels into the earth rather than rise up to monumentality and aggression. This design too was about landscaping and climate as much as architecture. Through this, he conveyed an architectonic symbolism which showed how much all religions have in common. This space, with a plan that was formed by a cross overlaid on a square, sank like a stepped well, like the Kund at Modera, but at the same time, its empty center reminded the observer of a Mughal charbagh with a water fountain at the center. The axis mundi rose intangibly from its center, recalling a Buddhist stupa, the oculus of the Roman pantheon, and the Brahmastan of the Vedic Vastu Purusha Mandala. By not building, the unmanifest was made manifest. This entirely outdoor project would bring people of all faiths together into the bright light of day and soothe their brows with a breeze cooled by a central water body. In the proposal for Ayodhya, we see Korea's architecture as argument, not necessarily intended for building, but for provoking discussion and perhaps changing our ways of seeing. The courtyard begins as a climatic device and then starts to garner a deeper signification as an empty center, devoid of form but full of possibilities.
there was also a competition that was held after, I think in 93, 94, where there's a publication out of it which came out. A lot of architects kind of proposing, and the question in my mind was always, I mean, a mosque is demolished, you know, and why are we thinking of anything else but a mosque, you know? Because there is something unjust that has happened. And this is something which there's something which you always take up with, because it's not peace, it's injustice. I will leave it at that, but want to invite, if there are questions, if there are responses to, of course, people have yet to read the book, which I invite all of you to do. It's very good biography, introduction, but also has sufficient depth into the works and mind of Korea, and it's available outside. But any questions or responses uh, at this moment? Oh.
So, hi, hello, I'm Aditya, and I'm actually reading the book currently. And it's really interesting when you mention that Korea's interventions in the city provide visionary ideas and specific solutions, but he faced mixed responses and success throughout his career. And you say that his vision often conflicted with politics, vested interest, and the status quo, and his ideas were implemented in homopathically diluted ways. So when I actually reading this book, I felt that for me, Korea never felt like a modernist. He always felt like a contemporary when I walked through his designs. And secondly, he developed a culture for all of us, like in architecture also, to design sensitively or in some sort of ways, and that's something which let me think actually.
And it's a good thing. What it does is it says that his work is not dated, right? Even as we walk through his buildings, we can still find, from our point of view, and you guys come from a little later generation, that we come from a time when Korea was practicing. You come from a time when Korea has already passed on. So you're looking at work that has been built earlier. But if you still find relevance in it, I think that is a wonderful thing. And each one of you can read his work in your own way. And I'm sure Korea would have appreciated that.
It's not a question as much as it's a comment. Uh, it's just an anecdote, maybe. I have been very fortunate to have been one of the first residents of Vashi and also of the sector Alpha, which he had first made. And everything that you discussed right now about the unmanifest of the open space and also the relevance to date, these places which do not find mention in any of the books or the monographs or documentation, but which have affected numerous people. Also, in the choice of my career as an urban designer, these spaces must be visited or documented before they lose. Before they lose out, I mean, before they are demolished, because there is this wave of redevelopment coming in Vashi, and this will soon go off. I had the opportunity to take my daughter and her friend on a walk through my childhood. And I was surprised at the number of memories which came up and which were uh, catalyzed by space, by the place, the first office, which is now in shambles. But there is absolutely no intent or no desire to document the same. There have been there have been appropriations, but still the space, even if people can't go. And it's actually beautiful. Uh, Artist Village is documented, it's published, but the site and services type, Sector 2, SS type, nobody really talks about it, but that is in fact one of the best examples of wealth generation over for generations of people, where uh, the unbuilt still controls the urban form. So it would be really nice if there is some sort of acknowledgement given to this place. The Navi Mumbai he made, sectors alpha to 6, would be great. That's all. That's what I want to say.
I mentioned, I think another thing you would probably agree also, being a long-time resident, that New Bombay is not designed for the scale for redevelopment. Okay, and every time there is redevelopment, it comes into direct clash with the original scales of the design nodes, because those sections were for a particular type of life. I think, very frankly, uh, shall we say that it's kind of gone beyond its expiry period, New Bombay, okay, in terms of the way it was planned, because of these scales. Every time you demolish a ground plus 2-story building and put a ground plus 14-story building on it, it's not going to match the road outside, okay, and it is still a planned city. The interesting thing is, over the last 50 years, it acted very beautifully like a sponge. It absorbed everything that was thrown at it because it was well planned. But I think it is reaching a certain stage where the kind of things you are allowing to happen are plain silly. Okay, they're just bad planning things. The unfortunate thing is they're all legal. There's nothing illegal about it. So when you take, say, all the P-type buildings, which are also Charles Correa's, those step form buildings, and E-type, and you take 10 of them and then you make a housing society out of it, it completely skews the section outside, on the road outside. So has New Bombay gone beyond Charles Correa in its current avatar? One would feel that way based on what is permissible, not so much on the habitation. But we do know this for a fact, whether it is Bombay or New Bombay, building today is not about habitation. It is about monetization of real estate. That is all it is.
Yeah. So from childhood, I've been living around a Charles Correa building, but I didn't know till I came to see. So it was the Portuguese church in Dadar. It was one of his very first works, like third or fourth project. And I always saw it from the road, and I always thought, ki, what is those lofts? It always fascinated me, but I never went inside. But once I was about 14, 15 years, I went inside, and then I saw the quality of the light. And then it struck me that this is something very different from the churches and all those things. And I guess that was the time I knew this is architecture, some different architecture, not that standard ones.
My favorite buildings in Bombay, not only because of this quality of space, but if you even look at its plan, you can see, how well articulated the plan is. You can, it's the ideal building if you're in the first year of architecture to go and visit, because that's where you understand architecture. You look at it and you understand it. It's really wonderful. It has lovely qualities of space. And very interestingly, that is also the church where after Korea died, his final, uh, services were held. And I was there. I think you were all there. It was a very deeply moving moment. That a person is going and he is there and he will be taken from a building which he himself designed, okay, to a cemetery some distance away. And I remember it was a very rainy day. There was a lot of rain, and we were all there, and everyone who knew him, whether architect or not architect, was present at that moment. And you realize how special he was, during a time like this.
So actually, fortunately, now I'm working on a building which is designed by Charles Correa in Goa. So I'm interning at Goa. So I was in Mumbai for a day, and I saw this in on Verem Villa. So Verem Villa 2728. So Charles also used to live in first and second villa, which is now it is being under work. So yeah, so we are designing. So Playgroup is the firm. Bhavna, if you know Bhavna, Amit used to work with Charles Correa. So our office is also like very much inspired by his work culture, and I've learned a lot from her about how geometries work, how Korea's spirit is there in the buildings he has designed. So when you visit Verem, it is very different. And when we design it again, you have to move a line very respectfully. You have to do things very carefully because it is a very good design. And then while designing one of the buildings right now for a competition, I was designing it, and Bhavna saw it, and she also said the same thing. You don't try to design like Charles, because it is not what he wanted. He wanted things. He in an interview also said he never look the buildings in the past and copy them, because it is not what architects do. It is so looking back at the past to be inspired is a good thing, but not copying them, because we have to we have to design heritage for the future, not for the past. So yeah, so while designing it, it actually changed the whole course of the design, and then it did not. I hope it did not become an Charles Korea building, but it is something else now. But yeah, the ideologies are very strong, so we can actually continue with them to design things, but not copying.
Better to read him than to, look at his designs.
The thing with biographies is they kind of, and their work. So it kind of almost becomes, the person almost becomes deified, So it's always a risk to kind of distance, be critical, to kind of speak and stuff like that. And that's the thing with biographies. I think that's in the nature of biographies that it becomes so singular. But I mean, it's it's a wonderful read. It's very written very legibly, very accessibly. It's a very accessible book for everybody. Like he said, his editors also made sure of that. So it's a very accessible book for all of us. It's full of anecdotes and a lot of things, and it gives you a survey at the same time of the works, of the life, of the places, and Mustansir's writing ties up the political history of the time, the the place, the details about the place, the other actors involved at every moment when he's discussing those moments in the book. So it's a wonderful read. I encourage all of you to kind of have a copy of this, and as Mustansir also said, read Korea's texts. The Place in Shade has all the essays, so it's a beautiful investment to make. It's a nice book. With that, I would like to thank Mustansir for spending so much time. I know you have to go back to New Bombay. It's Navi Mumbai. It's a but it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll meet again. I think now in February, no, in February with another with a translator who translate absurd fiction of Sibumul Mishra. He calls himself an anti-novelist. So we'll meet again for discussing those translations. Thank you so much, Mustansir again.